There is a point in prolonged trauma where survival stops feeling temporary. At first, people tell themselves they just need to get through the current situation, the current fight, the current financial problem, the current stretch of chaos. They hold on to the belief that eventually something will calm down, something will change, or some version of life will finally become manageable. But sometimes the chaos does not end. Sometimes years pass, and what once felt unbearable slowly becomes the structure of everyday life. Fear, exhaustion, and hypervigilance becomes part of the routine. Eventually, the person stops waiting for peace and starts organizing their life around the absence of it. That is where Bonnie's story moves in part 4. By the end of part 3, Bonnie was carrying grief, guilt, fear, emotional isolation, and trauma that had already been building for years. The abortion did not bring an end to the instability around her. It became another wound, layered into a life that was already collapsing under the weight of abuse, financial pressure, addiction, and constant emotional survival. Part 4 is not the chapter where freedom arrives. It is the chapter where hope becomes harder to reach. It is the chapter where Bonnie keeps functioning even as more and more of herself disappears underneath responsibility, violence, exhaustion, and fear. Welcome to No One Is Normal, the podcast where real stories remind us that none of us are alone. You can also visit the website www.bradhhill.com or www.nooneisnormal.co for resources, updates, and future podcast episodes. I am Brad H. Hill, and each week we talk about the messy, the complicated, and the deeply human moments that shape us and remain in our memories. I am not here to tell anyone how to live. I am here to offer the stories, the insights that made me realize that no one is normal, including me, because healing starts when self-honesty begins. In the months after the abortion, his daughter moved in with them full time. Before that, she had stayed with them off and on every other weekend, and Bonnie had already been playing a stepmother role in her life since she was about 6 years old. By this point, she was almost 15. A few months later, Bonnie also took in one of the girl's 14-year-old friends because the friend's family was moving away and she wanted to finish her school with the people she knew. Suddenly, Bonnie was trying to be a mother figure to 2 teenage girls who were barely 10 years younger than she was. That detail matters because it shows how much responsibility Bonnie was carrying while she was still emotionally drowning herself. She was working full-time, trying to keep food in the house, trying to create some kind of stability for young people, and still surviving the same man whose violence and control continue to shape every part of the home. She had to convince him to let her work because money was always short. His drinking and gambling kept draining whatever resources they had, and Bonnie was the one trying to keep the household from falling apart. His violent outbursts were becoming more frequent and more intense. Sometimes he could go a few months without hitting her, but the verbal abuse never really stopped. Other times, the physical violence returned multiple times in a week. Over time, the insults became part of the environment. He degraded her constantly and wore her down with words meant to make her feel worthless, lazy, stupid, and unwanted. After years of hearing those things, Bonnie says she had no self-esteem left. Not low self-esteem, no self-esteem. That is an important difference. There is a point where someone is not just insecure anymore. They are emotionally hollowed out. After enough years of humiliation, violence, blame, and fear, a person can begin to lose the ability to see themselves clearly at all. Bonnie was still showing up for work, still feeding people, still handling responsibilities, still caring for everyone around her, but inside she was slowly dying. She wanted to leave by then, but she also believed leaving could cost her life. By 1999, Bonnie's brother fell on hard times, and she took him in too. Now they were 5 people, living in a tiny trailer, while she tried to hold the household together financially. Her ex worked whenever he could get roofing jobs, but any money that came in was often gambled away or swallowed by drinking and instability. Bonnie became the reliable one. She paid the bills, kept the lights on, found ways to feed everyone, and carried the weight of a household that depended on her, while offering her almost no emotional safety in return. That same year, she started working a federal job. From the outside, parts of her life may have looked functional. She had work, she had responsibilities, she was taking care of others. But functioning does not mean someone is okay. Sometimes people become very good at surviving while appearing capable, because life does not give them permission to fall apart. Bills still need to be paid. People still need to eat. Work still expects them to show up. Bonnie kept going because stopping was not an option. Around that same time, she learned that her father had been extradited back to Wisconsin for unpaid child support from the years when she and her brothers were minors and her mother was struggling to provide for them. Bonnie had not heard from him since she was 13 or 14, before he went to prison. She went to the court date with her mother, partly to support her, and partly out of curiosity. When Bonnie saw him, he looked tired, disabled, homeless, and hopeless, despite everything her family had endured because of him. The empath in her felt sorry for him. She passed a note to the bailiff with her phone number on it, even though she was not sure if she wanted a relationship with him again. That moment says a lot about Bonnie's heart. Pain had not made her cruel. Even after everything she had survived, her instinct was still to help someone who had caused damage in her own life. He told her he had been sober for years. Bonnie helped him get clothing, food, a place to stay, disability assistance, and health care because he had no one else. Then she found out that after receiving his first disability check, he was binge drinking again. She was disgusted, but she still felt responsible for helping him because there was no one else to do it. In 2000, he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. Bonnie began going to his house daily to help with chores and tasks. She took him to chemo and radiation appointments while still working and providing for a household of 5. She worked second and third shifts, cared for everyone during the day, and slept whenever she could. Even sleep was not fully hers. Her ex would scream her name to wake her up and demand beer, even when she needed rest before work. That detail hit me because it shows how little room there was for Bonnie to exist as a person, with needs of her own. She was everyone's provider, caretaker, driver, helper, nurse, emotional punching bag, and financial safety net. But almost no one was giving her gentleness back. Eventually they moved into a farmhouse that was large enough for everyone. Bonnie says they lived there for 12 years, and even now she cannot drive past it because of the memories attached to that place. The farmhouse should have represented space, stability, maybe even a fresh start. Instead, it became the setting for some of the worst years of her life. Those were the years where whatever love remained finally died. By 2002 or 2003, Bonnie had completely lost hope that he would ever change. Earlier in the relationship, there had still been confusion, attachment, and maybe some part of her that wanted to believe the good version of him could come back. But during the farmhouse years, something inside her shifted. She was no longer waiting for him to become better. She was trying to survive who he already was. The violence during those years was brutal. He threw her downstairs, dragged her by her hair, shoved her outside in the cold, put her head through walls, stayed out all night, cheated on her, and continued regular physical and verbal abuse. Bonnie paid the bills, and everything was in her name. He even forced her to pay thousands of dollars toward his back child support so he would not go to jail, threatening that if he went to prison, he would come out and beat or kill her. That is the kind of control that traps a person from every angle. If she paid, she carried the financial burden. If she refused, she feared retaliation. There was no clean choice available because abuse had turned every option into a threat. He yelled constantly about the house, money, errands, work, timing, and accusations that never seemed to end. If Bonnie took too long at the grocery store or came home 10 minutes late from work, it could turn into a confrontation. She describes having panic attacks if a train stopped her or traffic delayed her because she knew what might be waiting at home. That kind of fear changes the relationship a person has with time. A few minutes no longer feel like a few minutes. A delay becomes danger. A traffic light becomes panic. The ordinary inconveniences of life become emotionally loaded because someone at home has trained the body to expect punishment for things outside its control. One night, after a fight she cannot fully remember the beginning of, he beat her badly enough that she lost consciousness. When she woke up, she was in the passenger seat of his truck while he screamed at her and called her names. Then he threw her out at a mutual friend's house in the middle of the night. She lay in the yard for a few minutes, gathered herself, and went to the door at 2 a.m. The next day, he called repeatedly demanding that she come home. That part is hard to sit with, because it shows how normalized life-threatening violence had become. She could be beaten unconscious, thrown out of a vehicle, left in a yard at night, and then expected to return home, as if the real issue was her disobedience instead of his violence. As the years went on, his drinking increased. He was battling type 2 diabetes and alcoholism, but he refused to take care of himself. His health problems cost him roofing jobs because he would not show up or would break contracts. Eventually, he mostly stayed home and drank. By 2006 or 2007, he started telling Bonnie she had to marry him so he could be on her insurance. He was getting older, his health was declining, and he wanted access to the benefits she had earned through her work. Bonnie told him no. She had begged him before to change, go to counseling, seek treatment, or do something different with his life. He refused. Nothing had improved. Everything had gotten worse. By then, she did not even want him touching her, and intimacy had largely disappeared except for times when he forced himself on her. His drinking and diabetes made even that less frequent, but somehow he still twisted it back onto her, accusing her of cheating if she was not sleeping with him. He badgered her about marriage for the next year or two. Bonnie remembers the night she finally gave in. It was after another severe beating that left her with a cracked rib, a dislocated jaw, bruises, bleeding, and other injuries. By then, saying no had become dangerous enough that eventually giving in felt like another survival decision. They got married in November 2009 after 22 years together. Bonnie was 38 years old. She says that when she said, "I do," she did not mean it. That sentence carries so much exhaustion. A wedding is supposed to represent love, choice, joy, and commitment. For Bonnie, it represented pressure, fear, financial control, and resignation. When she looks at photos from that day, she sees herself as a shell of a woman. She looked sad, vacant, and painfully thin from years of stress. She could barely get over 103 pounds. He made her take out a loan against her 401k to pay for the wedding. She tried to keep it cheap, but even then, the wedding, the color, and the decisions were what he wanted. She did not have a real say in something that was supposed to be one of the most personal days of her life. To this day, she despises royal blue because of that wedding. That detail matters because trauma often attaches itself to ordinary things. A color can become a memory. A house can become unbearable to drive past. A smell, song, room, or photograph can carry the emotional weight of an entire era. In 2009, Bonnie rescued a little Yorkie named Dewey. Dewey may be one of the most emotionally important parts of this chapter, because by then Bonnie's life felt almost completely empty of affection. The relationship had no warmth left, no tenderness, no sense of companionship. She did not want her ex near her, physically or emotionally, but she still needed something to love. She needed a living connection that was gentle, innocent, and safe. That little dog became a kind of emotional lifeline. Bonnie says Dewey kept her going through the years. On nights when she did not want to continue, he was there beside her, licking her tears. Even though he was small, he tried to protect her. There is something incredibly moving about that because survivors often survive through anchors that may seem small to other people: a pet, a child, a friendship, a routine, a promise made quietly to themselves, something that keeps them connected to life when everything else feels dark. For Bonnie, Dewey gave her love without cruelty attached to it. And after years of love being mixed with fear, control, humiliation, and violence, that mattered more than words can probably capture. In 2010, her ex had a minor stroke caused by years of uncontrolled diabetes, daily alcohol use, smoking, and self-destruction. He could still walk, talk, and function, but the stroke affected his balance and peripheral vision. Instead of treating the stroke as a warning, he kept drinking, smoking, using drugs, and deteriorating. Eventually, Bonnie found a crack pipe in the basement and realized he was smoking crack. When she confronted him, he told her that what he did was none of her business. At the same time, he was stealing bill money from her purse for drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, and gambling. He would borrow money from people and tell them to collect from Bonnie on her payday. Some weeks, she saw only a small fraction of her own paycheck because his debts swallowed the rest before she could use it to survive. The financial abuse had become another cage. Bonnie was the one working, but he controlled the crisis. She earned the money, but he created the debt. She paid the bills, but he created the instability. She was responsible for the consequences of choices she did not make. And because everything was tied to her name, her credit, her income, and her future, she kept being forced to clean up the wreckage. One day, while backing out of the driveway, two men approached her car on both sides. They told her that her husband said she would pay them money he owed for drugs. Bonnie refused and told them she had nothing to do with whatever he owed. One of the men showed her a gun and threatened her. Thankfully, a neighbor heard the yelling, came outside with his own gun, and told them to leave her alone. Bonnie went to work afterward, but she could not get the incident out of her mind. Later, when she came home, those same men were inside the house with him, drinking and smoking crack. She was forced to pay the $300 he owed them. What stands out most is not only the danger of that situation, but Bonnie's reaction to it. She says the sad thing is that none of it even surprised her anymore. That is what prolonged chaos does. It lowers the emotional alarm system, because the mind cannot stay shocked forever. At some point, horror becomes another thing to get through before work, before bills, before the next demand, before the next argument. He demanded that she wait on him constantly. One time before work, he insisted she make him food, then spat a mouthful of it in her face and threw the plate at her, because it was not warm enough and did not taste right. She was regularly screamed at over food, cigarettes, beer, money, errands, and anything else he decided was wrong. She even had to prepare his insulin shots throughout the years. Bonnie admits that sometimes she wished she had given him too much and ended his life so she could finally be free. That sentence is brutal, but it is also honest. It shows the depth of desperation she had reached. She was not fantasizing about cruelty. She was imagining an end to captivity, because escape still felt impossible. Then something unexpected happened. Her ex applied for disability because of his declining health, but discovered that because they were married, Bonnie's income disqualified him. Suddenly, the marriage he had forced her into for insurance became inconvenient for him financially. He decided they needed to get divorced so he could qualify for SSI disability benefits. He told Bonnie they would only be divorced on paper, but inside Bonnie something shifted. By the end of 2011 or the beginning of 2012, she says she absolutely despised him. She hated how mean, evil, and selfish he was. And when he brought up divorce, she saw something she had not been able to see clearly in years. A possible way out. It was not freedom yet. It was not safety. It was not a plan fully formed. But somewhere inside her, after decades of fear and exhaustion, a small opening appeared. She started working a second job to save money and keep bills paid. She worked third shift at her main job, then went straight to help her brother-in-law clean roofing debris during the day. Sometimes she would come home black from head to toe, shower, and try to sleep before going back to work again. Even then, sleep was not protected. He would have people over, play loud music on purpose, yell for her to bring him beer, send her for cigarettes, or demand that she drive his drunk friends around. Reading this part feels exhausting because Bonnie's life had narrowed almost completely into work, fear, responsibility, and survival. But underneath that exhaustion, something important was beginning. She had started imagining a life separate from him, even if she had no idea how she would reach it yet. That matters because escape often begins internally before it becomes visible externally. Before someone leaves, there is usually a moment when something inside them stops believing endurance is the only option. It may be quiet, it may be buried under fear, it may take months or years before action follows, but somewhere inside, the person begins separating survival from surrender. For Bonnie, that separation was beginning. This chapter feels different from the earlier parts because it is not only about violence, it is about depletion. It is about what happens when a person survives for so long that life becomes mechanical. Bonnie was not living with the belief that things would improve anymore. She was functioning because she had to, working because people depended on her, caring for others because that was who she was, and enduring fear because the consequences of leaving still felt deadly. What stayed with me most was how many people Bonnie carried while no one seemed to fully carry her. She cared for teenage girls, helped her brother, supported her father through illness, paid bills, managed crises, protected animals, worked multiple jobs, and still absorbed abuse inside the home. From the outside, that kind of responsibility can look like strength, but underneath it was exhaustion, loneliness, and the slow death of hope. There is also something painful about the way compassion kept showing up in her story even when it cost her. She helped her father after all the harm connected to his absence and addiction. She took in people who needed a place to stay. She cared for someone who abused her. She kept functioning for everyone else while losing more and more of herself. That is not weakness. It is what happens when someone has been trained by life to survive by taking care of everything and everyone around them, even when they are the one who needs saving. This chapter was hard for me because it shows the part of survival that does not always look dramatic from the outside. It is not one isolated explosion. It is years of exhaustion piled on top of years of fear. It is work shifts, bills, caregiving, threats, sickness, debt, violence, animals, groceries, and trying to sleep while someone screams your name from another room. What affected me most was realizing how much of Bonnie's identity had been consumed by endurance. The young girl who once dreamed about building a different life had become someone trying to survive one day at a time inside a house full of memories she still cannot bear to drive past. And yet she still kept going. Not because she believed life was beautiful at that point, not because she thought he was going to change, not because there was some easy hope waiting for her. She kept going because something in her refused to completely die. Even when almost everything around her was trying to bury that part of her, that kind of strength is not polished or inspirational in the simple way people like to package survival. It is uglier, more exhausting, and more primal than that. It is the kind of strength that exists when there is no light left in front of someone, but they keep moving anyway, because stopping feels even more dangerous. Not everyone listening to this episode has lived through physical abuse, but many people understand what it feels like to slowly lose themselves inside survival. Life can become so heavy for so long that happiness stops feeling like the goal. Sometimes the goal becomes getting through the shift, paying the bill, avoiding the fight, protecting the people or animals who depend on you, and making it through one more day without completely falling apart. That kind of survival can be invisible to other people. Someone can keep showing up, working, helping, answering messages, handling responsibilities, and still be barely holding themselves together internally. Functioning is not always proof that someone is okay. Sometimes it is only proof that they have learned how to keep moving while carrying pain quietly. If this part of Bonnie's story connects with you, maybe the important thing to remember is that exhaustion does not mean failure. Feeling worn down does not mean weakness. Sometimes the body and mind are simply responding to years of carrying more than anyone was meant to carry alone. And sometimes the first sign of change is not hope. Sometimes it is the quiet realization that staying the same will eventually destroy whatever part of you is still trying to live. By the end of this chapter, Bonnie had reached the edge of what a person can keep enduring. The violence and financial control was still there. The emotional exhaustion, fear, addiction, instability, and responsibility were still consuming nearly every part of her life. But something had shifted beneath the surface. The idea of divorce began as another one of his selfish plans, another way for him to use her life for his benefit. But for Bonnie, it became the first real opening she had seen in years. She did not know how she would leave. She did not know how she would survive financially. She did not know whether he would follow through on the threats he had made so many times. But she had started imagining escape. In part 5, that quiet internal shift becomes action. The final sequence of events begins with fear, secrecy, violence, and the realization that survival is no longer enough. Bonnie finally reaches a point where staying feels like death, and leaving becomes the only chance she has left to live. Just a reminder, the stories and conversations in this podcast are for informational and personal reflection only. Nothing shared here should be taken as medical, legal, or professional advice. Always speak with a qualified professional about your own personal situation. Thank you for listening to No One Is Normal. If today's message resonated with you, you can find the book No One Is Normal on Amazon and Kindle, and explore more resources at www.bradhhill.com or www.nooneisnormal.co. Remember, you weren't meant to be normal, you were meant to be you.